Hello there, people of the internet. I'm here with a truly unique little handgun. This right here is a handgun that was a gift to me from my father. He had acquired it and did not see much use for it. Whenever I'd gotten it, it was completely and utterly not in functional order, and it was definitely quite the challenge getting it to become in functioning order. So it was completely seized up. It was covered in so much corrosion. It was nuts. It was a mess. It really was a mess. So this right here is a Clark first handgun chambered in 32 Smith and Wesson. If I say 32 ACP, I'm sorry. That's just force of habit. I mean 32 Smith and Wesson. So this right here is a handgun that originated from Clerke Technicorp back in the 1970s. I think it was a direct result of gun control that was passed in 1968. Essentially, the gun control of 1968 was done with the idea of completely eliminating Saturday night special pistols that were coming into the country by a huge amount. And what Saturday night special pistols are is other countries would make dirt cheap little handguns and sell them off to the United States civilian population. These dirt cheap handguns oftentimes undercut United States manufactured handguns by a tremendous margin, and they were made incredibly cheaply with very poor quality materials. And that's just kind of the name of the game of what handguns were back then. The gun control passed, and they stopped the import of those handguns, so many United States companies tried stepping up to fill in the market for these dirt cheap handguns that were no longer coming in. And this appears to be one of them. So this is, for all intents and purposes, a Saturday night special 32 Smith & Wesson revolver made by Clerke Technicorp. So, the frame itself, from what I've been able to gather, is just a cast metal, a pot metal of some kind. I imagine that it's very similar to the cast metals that were used for all the Saturday Night Special handguns back in the day. Probably some kind of zinc alloy, if I'm betting correctly. The trigger itself is made of that same material. The hammer itself made of that same material. The entire handgun is just coated in a chrome. I won't lie, I kind of like the chrome look to it. The grips are plastic. From what I've been able to gather, most of them are like a black plastic. This one has a little bit fancier dyed red wood looking thing. There's a serial number on the bottom of that particular frame, the particular grip right there. There's nothing real special or notable about these snub nose revolvers other than the fact that they're really not that great. From what I've been able to gather, people tell me whenever they use these, they're notorious for going out of time. They're notorious for having issues with the frame cracking and whatnot. They're just not good. They're designed not to be good. Their Saturday night special system, it's just a setup to where it's supposed to be as cheap as possible. I know back in the day, from what I've been able to gather, these revolvers ran between $15 and $20, which is quite cheap, and they're still very cheap even to this day. If you manage to find one, they're going to run you about $100 or so, and that's just the name of the game for Saturday night specials. Of course, if you look on Gunbroker or something like that, you're probably going to come across one that is way more expensive than it should be. How these actually operate, we got this little pin right here on the front of the revolver that pulls out just like this. And then the cylinder rotates out. You get 5 shots of 32 Smith & Wesson. And you're supposed to use your rod that retains the cylinder retaining rod. You're supposed to use this as an ejector to punch out your spent casings. The problem is, from the reports I've read with the people who actually dealt these guns, these pins get lost all the time. And that makes sense. The types of people who buy Saturday night specials are typically the types of people who are either like me and they just enjoy the history and collectability of some of these old school firearms, or they have them for like a job or a purpose or something that they need done, and they tend to not really care about, keeping the retaining pin on something that they're just going to toss into a river, like, say, a mobster hitman or something like that. It's just the name of the game whenever you get dirt cheap revolvers like this. People value things that they pay for, and whenever they pay incredibly small amounts of money for something, they tend to not really value it. So this right here, being a gift from my father, I actually very much value this thing, and I don't foresee me looking to get rid of it by throwing it into a river. So that being said, the cylinder, it does spin freely, and I think that is actually the way that this handgun is designed. It's supposed to spin like that whenever the hammer is down, and whenever you cock the hammer, that is whenever the cylinder locks up nice and tight. So this right here should be both single and double action. Yep, there is in fact a double action feature. I don't see any transfer bar or anything inside of this revolver. No kind of nothing there. We have just a firing pin right here, and that goes down and strikes the primer of the cartridge and sets off that cartridge, and well, you know the rest. So there's no sort of safety system on this revolver. If you're going to carry it, you would have to carry it with one of the chambers empty. Otherwise, you risk having issue with your revolver going off. I also don't think that there's no safety latch of any kind on this. The hammer is just down or fully cocked back. There is no in between. So you would have to carry this with a round in, or with an empty chamber. No round in one of the chambers for you to rest your hammer on if you wanted to actually carry this safely. Besides that, it functions the same way as basically any other single double action revolver. You got your rounds inside of your cylinder, some sort of mechanism designing to where the cylinder can swing out like that. This is not a single action army style of revolver to where you need an ejection rod and things like that. Your ejection rod actually comes out of the gun, and you just knock out your spent casings like that. Let's have a look at the 32 Smith & Wesson ammunition that this revolver actually chambers. So I've got this right here, 32 Smith & Wesson. It is a little tiny round, and I've still got to work on cleaning the chambers on this particular one, because this 32 Smith & Wesson does not fit in any of the chambers. There's just corrosion in there. I can see it, and they only go about that far in, and that's not going to cut it. There is no ejector or anything on this revolver. That's why you need that little spent rod. So this is the 32 Smith & Wesson, not a very large or powerful or potent cartridge, and I'm going to compare it to 22 long rifle. So those are the two cartridges side by side. Obviously the 32 is going to be a wider bullet, but lengthwise they are about the same. As a matter of fact, the brass on them look to be identical in terms of the length. Maybe that was the design that was done intentionally. I don't know. Anyway, this is what we're looking at. Little tiny round, little tiny revolver, dirt cheap revolver. It's not going to generate very high pressures, and that's why they can get away with using the very poor materials that they were using. So this is the Clerke first handgun. I'm probably going to shoot it, but I'm likely going to use some 32 Smith & Wesson hand loads. I have this right here, which is an Ivor Johnson, I believe, first model, also chambered in 32 Smith & Wesson. And I'm going to hand load some black powder rounds for this, just because I do believe that this is a black powder revolver. So maybe I'll run black powder rounds in this right here, just to, like, basically ensure that I'm not going to risk this handgun falling apart. Should be easy enough to clean. This right here opens right up, and then I just kind of do some scrubbing in there and clean all that out. Maybe I can figure out how to get this cylinder out. Looks like it's just a pin that knocks out. I'm willing to bet that's exactly the case. Anyway, folks, that's going to be a topic for another day. Thanks for watching. Appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off. Have yourself a fantastic day. I will see you guys on the next episode.
I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.